Hi, my name's QR Stevens, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about navigating through Passaggio, or the breaks in the voice, in a woman's voice. So what is Passaggio? Passaggio is defined as the transition area between the vocal registers, and these vocal registers are classified as the chest voice and the head voice, or the dark mechanism and the light mechanism. So the way that these work are the chest voice supports your lower sound or your lower register, and your head voice is characterized by your top register or your high notes. In a guy voice, is typically more falsetto type sound. So the way that these work in Passaggio is they mix. So as you can see in the diagram here, I created chest voice as a triangle, and your head voice is an inverted triangle. In the middle here of Passaggio, they're mixed. So they have to overlap a little bit in order to get any kind of sound here, because here is where the muscles are no longer characterized as one part. So in your lower register, your voice is your chest voice. So the muscles, that's the muscle group that is used for those lower notes. In your head voice, it's the opposite. It's a different set of mechanisms or muscle group entirely for the upper range. Now in Passaggio, the trouble is, and this is where many singers come into a more difficult area of their voice, is because you can use different amounts of your light and dark mechanism here in this area. And depending on what your natural tendencies are in your voice, it'll shift. So some people are naturally more chest dominant and some are more head dominant, and I'll explain that later on in the video. So essentially, Passaggio does not have its own set of muscle groups or own set of muscles to navigate here, and that's why it's so difficult. So ideally, especially in classical singing, the goal is to maintain an even timbre through Passaggio. So to keep an even amount of chest voice and head voice and muscles working here to create a smooth transition. So, ooh, very little discrepancies between the head voice and the chest voice here. And that is, again, ideal in classical singing, mostly. In musical theater and pop culture, however, it is typically more common to bring your chest voice up a little, and this is called a chest voice dominant mix. So what you're doing is you still have a little bit of your head voice brought down into this middle area, but it is more of your chest voice. You're just making sure that head voice is there to release some of the tension. So this, again, is very typical in musical theater and is typically called belting. And this is very difficult for singers who carry a lot of tension naturally in their voice, as the chest voice is typically a lot heavier, and the higher you try to bring it up through Passaggio, the more difficult and strained it can become. Now, trained singers can learn to mix this very well and still create that belting sound while still maintaining a healthy voice production. Now, in contrast, especially in more modern pop songs now, there's a head voice dominant mix, and this is also very typical in lullaby sounds. So it's very light in the middle, and it's not too heavy, and it essentially sounds more like your head voice than it would anything else. And again, this is typically very common also in classical singing, depending on whether you're talking about opera or choral sounds. Oftentimes, where singers run into trouble is when they're overcompensating. So they're bringing up too much of their chest voice into the middle range or too much of their head voice into the middle range, and it's leaking in and it creates an imbalance. Now, when you're bringing too much of your head voice, you typically get a breathy sound, and it just does not sound supported. And in contrast, when you bring up too much of your chest voice, there's typically just too much tension. Your voice will crack, and it's not a healthy sound, and it's not very pretty. So whether you're trying to maintain a chest voice dominant mix, a head voice dominant mix, or just an equal mix of the two, you need to make sure that you are mixing both sounds. You can't just maintain your chest voice or your head voice in Passaggio, because those muscle groups are not meant to be in that range alone without the support of the other. In conclusion, navigating through Passaggio in a woman's voice is pretty difficult because you have to be able to maintain both muscle mechanisms and use both of those in the middle area, and utilizing both of these mechanisms typically take a lot of training or practice, at the very least, guided practice. So the goal through Passaggio is to healthily navigate the breaks in your voice and make sure you're maintaining a healthy, even mix of your head mechanism and your chest mechanism in the middle area where there's not a muscle group to support it.